It's not uncommon to go on social media and hear people talking about some of the wins that they have from a financial perspective. But one of the things that I seldomly hear are some of the losses that come along the way. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over 9 of the biggest financial mistakes that I've made throughout the course of my life. And if I could actually go back and change some of those things, not only would I change them, but what would I do differently? So number 1 on the list is saving too much money. I remember my first real job out of college. I was making around $40,000 a year. And at the time, that was a lot of money for me. And one of the first things that I wanted to do is I just wanted to stack up and save as much money as I possibly could. And I think that's all fine and well, saving money, but I was saving money just to save. And at the time, this is in the early 2000s, banks were giving out maybe 0.25% to 0.5% of interest to hold your money in a savings account. And one thing that I didn't understand was that inflation was eating at the value of the dollars that I had in my savings account. So inflation generally is around 3 to 4% per year. And the money that I had in my savings account was paying me maybe 0.5%. So my money was losing 2.5 to 3% of its value every single year that it sat in a savings account. I didn't understand that at all. I just knew keep your money in a savings account, try to stack it as much as possible. And that was just what I did. I didn't have a lot of financial education. I didn't have a lot of financial understanding, and I didn't know what to do differently with my money. And basically what happened is I missed out on a lot of opportunities to grow my money exponentially over the years. One of the biggest regrets is looking back knowing I had $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in a savings account that was sitting there and doing absolutely nothing other than losing value. The second financial mistake that I made was just going into consumer debt. Not only did I go into debt, I went into debt for things I can't even remember. I mean, when I look back, I know that I used to go out to eat. I know that I would get my car repaired and pay for gas and things of that nature, but I racked up about $8,000 worth of credit card debt in my 20s. And when I look back, I have no idea what I even spent that money on. No clue. And at the time, that was a lot of money for me because interest rates on my cards were around 27%, and it was roughly on 3 to 4 cards. I mean, I had a Sears card that was maxed out. I don't even think Sears is around anymore. I had a Best Buy card that was maxed out. I had a Visa card that was maxed out, a MasterCard that was maxed out. And even though it was only $8,000 at that time, that was so much money to me. And it took me so long to actually pay that off. And the crazy thing about it, and I look back, is I had probably $15,000 or $20,000 in my savings account, and I didn't want to pull the money out to pay off the debt. And when I look back and think about why did I not just use that money to pay that off, I still don't know why. No clue. The third financial mistake that I made was not investing early enough, right? I talked about having all of that money sitting in a savings account, basically losing value every single day. And instead of having it in a savings account, I could have had it in an S&P index fund, and I would have been making 8 to 12% per year on my money. But again, I had no idea about how finances worked. I mean, I did have a real job at that time, had a 401k, but to be completely honest with you, I had no idea what was in my 401k. I went with the fund that they gave me whenever I signed up. And for the first 5 years or so, I never even checked. I didn't know how much it was costing me to have that 401k index fund or mutual fund that I had. No clue. I just knew that I had a certain amount of money that was coming out of my paycheck every single month that was going into my 401k, but I had no idea where it was going. And most of the time, I didn't even know how it was performing. So you add that to the fact that I had money sitting on the sidelines instead of being invested in the stock market in stocks such as Tesla, Apple, Microsoft. Now, mind you, this is in the 2000s, where if I had that money in there and it was still invested into those companies today, I would be so much further ahead from a financial perspective than I am today. So when I think back about some of the biggest financial mistakes that I've made in the past, not investing early and often is definitely at the top. The fourth financial mistake that I made was taking on too much student loan debt. I remember when I graduated from undergraduate and I had about $35,000 to $40,000 worth of student loan debt. And when I think about that now, it's not that much compared to how much student loan debt that people have today. But back then, that was a lot of money, especially when I was only making around $40,000 a year. And I remember getting my very first statement in the mail, and I was thinking like, man, this is gonna take me forever to pay back. And after I paid it for a few months and I realized that the balance wasn't really going anywhere, I was like, man, so this is really gonna take me 20 years to pay this off. Now, luckily, one of the things that I did do is I used a lot of the money that I had sitting in my savings account to pay down and eventually pay off my student loan debt. So I didn't invest early and often. I ultimately used a majority of my savings to pay down my student loans and got those paid off as quickly as possible. But had I not taken out more student loans than I needed, I wouldn't have been in that position. I mean, I took out loans for much more than the tuition, books, and lab fees. I just wanted money in my pocket. And instead of working more hours at my part-time job, I took the easy way out and I took the loans and it set me back. So if I could do that all over again, I would only take out enough loans to just cover my tuition and books, lab fees, and all the extras. I would have just worked my part-time job and paid that out of pocket. The fifth financial mistake that I made was buying more car than I needed at that time. Everybody that knows me knows that I'm a car guy. And in fact, from my 20s all the way to my mid 30s, I was in and out of 15 to 20 cars, not exaggerating. I would drive them for 12 to 18 months and then I would trade them in because I would get tired of them. And the problem with that is some of them had negative equity, some of them had positive equity. But whenever you trade in a car, sometimes you roll that negative equity into the new loan and it just continues, and all of the money that I spent paying car payments could have been spent on something else. It could have went towards investing or just paying down debt. So that's one of the biggest regrets that I have from a financial perspective, is spending so much money on cars. And when I look back and I think about it, I paid a car payment for 15 years straight. That's crazy. They say that buying cars is one of the quickest way to destroy your income. And now that I look back at that, it's absolutely true. The sixth financial mistake that I made was not negotiating my salary on the first few corporate jobs that I got out of college. I remember my very first job that I got out of college. I was just excited to get hired. I got the offer letter in the mail and I accepted immediately. I didn't negotiate the salary. I didn't negotiate the vacation, the sick times, any of that. I just accepted that offer. And the crazy thing about that is when I look back at that right now, that's absolutely not something that I would do. I mean, I aggressively negotiate with any job that I get. The last few jobs that I've worked, I've negotiated at least 3 to 4 rounds on my salary. There are several people in my coaching program that I've talked about career development with. And whenever I ask about negotiating salary and vacation and sick days and stock options and et cetera, 99% of the people don't negotiate on that. I think that's something that's more common than anybody likes to talk about. I left so much on the table early on in my career, not negotiating my salary and other job perks. I likely could have had a 10% increase in my salary at every step of the way prior to actually making this a common practice whenever I take a new role. One piece of advice that I'll give you is if you're going out and you're interviewing for a new job and you get an offer letter, be prepared to negotiate on all of the perks, including the salary that you get, and don't be compelled to just accept the very first offer like I did. The seventh financial mistake that I made was not making budgeting a habit earlier on. I mean, nowadays, my budget is so crisp and so tight, I don't need to actually sit down and write it out anymore. But way back when, I never would budget, and it often got me into trouble, which is why I got myself into credit card debt, because I was spending more money than I was bringing in. Add that to the fact that I would have $30,000 in a savings account that I actually pulled a majority of that out to pay off my student loans, and not budgeting became a problem for me, especially when I was buying and selling cars every 12 to 18 months. Although I never put myself back into credit card debt after I actually got those paid off, at one point in my life, I was living paycheck to paycheck, not because I had to, it was because I didn't understand where my money was going every single month. And when I think about that, it's so crazy, because I had a mortgage, a car payment, insurance, utilities, things like that. But I was spending every single dollar that came in, and I didn't know where it was going. The 8th financial mistake that I made was FOMO investing. After I started to learn about the stock market and I got in there and started buying and selling stocks, one of the worst things that I ever did was take advice from people that were pumping junk stocks, right? So this would be kind of like the meme stocks that we have today, like your GameStop stock. I would go out, I would put money into these stocks, I would lose money, pull them out of the market, get upset, and then repeat the process. I don't even know what the hell I was doing or why I was doing that. I had my core holdings in my index funds, but I also had other money that I was investing in garbage companies because I was following the hype train. So when I started to learn how to invest, I did get a little eager at times, which is why I always say that building wealth is often a slow process, especially in the beginning. And I got burned early on in the process because I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that building wealth is like a snowball at the top of the hill, that if you continue to roll, by the time it gets to the bottom of the hill, it's a big ball. I wanted that ball to start off big, and that was my problem. The 9th mistake that I made was lending money to family and friends. Now, when I say that, on the surface, it may sound bad, but often money ruins relationships. And earlier on in my life, money did ruin a few of the relationships that I had, not necessarily with my family, more so with friends, but it was a problem. And now that I look back on it, I would handle things so much differently to protect those relationships. So the very first thing that I wouldn't do is loan the money unless it was absolutely necessary. And number 2, if I did loan the money, I would make sure to let them know that it was a gift and it was not a loan and there was no expectation for them to pay me back. If you take that approach, it makes things so much easier, because when someone owes you and they can't pay you back or something comes up, it's one of the biggest reasons why most people fall out. So if you're in a position to where you're able to help others, make sure that they understand that it's a gift and not a loan, because if it is a loan, it has potential to ruin your relationship. All right, so that's 9 financial mistakes that I've made over the course of my life. There's tons of things that I wish that I could have done differently from a financial perspective, but 90% of everything that I've learned to date has been by trial and error. So on one hand, those mistakes were painful, but the lessons that were learned were actually valuable.